This is update for December 5, 2022, day 285 of the war, end of the date update. This is also catch-up update for December 4. It's essentially nothing has changed over this time. But we're going to start today with, as we always do, with the strategic general updates. And let's actually look a little bit, actually found some interesting chart about the supply of Russian crude or sale of Russian crude. So as you can see, as essentially the countries that take over the supply is Turkey, India, and China. That's essentially who buys right now. Before the war, so you can see they were pretty much small chunk of the buying of the buyers of the Russian crude. Before it was mostly dominated, as you can see, Netherlands, but Netherlands is really is a trading hub, so then it goes pretty much everywhere, and then generally EU. So as you can see, those are where one of the biggest buyers. So this is again proves the point that okay, if you don't have EU, which is you see the black one is pretty much done. Netherlands is very low. Say Poland is become very tiny, so you see was sizable buyer. Now it's gone. The only one that's Italy is still there essentially, but there is no shortage of buyers of crude. It's extremely a liquid commodity. You can call it gold. You can it's essentially equals cash, and it can be quickly and easily converted into cash. So that's why the sanctions are futile and really don't resolve anything and will never resolve anything. Now let's actually look at a little bit different map, which is going to be also interesting. This is a result of the sanctions. So what you can see here is amount of CO2 in the air, or basically air pollution as a result of burning coal or wood or whatever. So as you can see, Germany and Poland are, the worst situation, and the reason for that is because so-called green energy doesn't work, and they have to burn coal, and that's your result, right? So you can see that straight, sort of factual, scientific. The reason France is relatively sort of light yellow is because it has a lot of nuclear power, right? So the pollution there is not as bad, essentially. So just again, as you can see, this so-called green energy doesn't quite work at scale. It is actually, I would say, a great tool for individual sort of independence of grid sort of living. This is definitely one of the potential solutions, even though it doesn't quite work in, up north, even like in northern Ukraine, it doesn't quite work in the winter. Nevertheless, it's better than, let's say, than nothing. That's the best available alternative, let's put it this way. Now going back to the sort of Russian crude. So if you remember, I mentioned about Pakistan tried to kind of like squeeze out Russia and get like 40% discount. So it looks like and Russia said no. So Pakistan government announced that they actually signed an agreement with Russia to sell at discount. Probably they got this 40%, so they managed to squeeze Russia. And in general, the trend is such that even these buyers of Russian crude, such as China, India, Turkey, they all try to put extra pressure, squeeze extra Russia to get deeper discounts for its crude. So just as a statistics, recently over trailing 4 weeks, the average amount of Russian crude that goes to China, Turkey, and India cumulatively is 2.45 million barrels per day. Just a reminder, Russian production is about 11. So it looks like it went down a little bit, but it's probably related to this sanction situation where probably some of the buyers are getting extra cautious, or they demand higher discounts. Then another interesting point is that Russian crude oil from Sakhalin 2, which is in Russian Far East. There's island Sakhalin straight up north of Japan. It's fairly big oil field there called Sakhalin 2, and so it is exempt from the sanctions, and that oil goes to Japan. So the buyer of that is Japan. So basically, there's no price ceiling on that. Then there is also no price ceiling for the supply of crude to Hungary. So what this really means, there's a lot of holes. So for example, in the case of Hungary, that country can become basically a hub and resell that crude further, like to Austria, to everybody. So again, this whole thing totally bogus and doesn't work at all, and it will never work. And it's actually better that it doesn't work, because it will create humongous harm to already existing a lot of harm in the West. Then now let's switch a little bit to Russian natural gas production. So there is some statistical numbers. So natural gas production in Russia fell by 11.6% for the January through November period of this year. So it's basically January through November of 2022 versus the same period 21. So it's down again, as I said, 11.6% to 613 billion cubic meters, which is, let's say, still a huge amount of natural gas that's being produced. The production from the wells is from the natural gas wells is much harder to stop. So, just for the reference, Russia used to supply about 200 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Europe. The rest would be converted, to fertilizer or used for like heavy industry. That's why the Russian, steel is super competitive, or pretty much it's used wherever it can be used. And so as you can see, there's still a lot of it being produced, and the export is really there is a problem of Russian natural gas sales. China is uptaking something, but it's totally not meaningful number for Russia right now. There is another news that natural gas supply via Yamal pipeline, which goes from Russia through Belarus, Poland to Germany, that it has been stopped. It's unclear why. So another sort of Russian route is being cut off. Unclear if it's permanent or temporary. So again, could be more sort of problems again in Germany, more coal burning as a result of that. Then situation in Russian sort of finances and state finances are really not going well, as you can see, as a result of all of this situation. So Russian ruble fell slightly above 63 Russian rubles per US dollars. If you remember, probably 5 months ago, it was firmly under 60, like 57, 58 rubles per US dollar. So as you can see, this situation, the trend is in a negative direction for the Russian ruble, which is reflection of the Russian economy, because currency is always reflection of the underlying economic conditions. So as you can see, even ruble is sort of going south and showing significant deterioration in Russian economy and finances, and this is whole interconnected system. Related to this, and I would say add to this that the speed of the slide of the Russian ruble will only increase over time as things will deteriorate, because essentially at this point natural gas export essentially dead, and that's a huge and significant part of Russian export. And crude is still there, still functioning, but everybody tries to sort of squeeze Russia, but that still works, and it's gonna work probably forever, I'd say. Then reflecting this whole deteriorating economic picture, if we look at the real estate prices, more residential in Moscow, So there was some kind of like analysis done, and it says that 80% of the sellers are willing to basically give significant discounts without even, significant negotiations. Just in typical discount, they just look at, just for the starters, is 15%. Uh, so as you can see, the market is extremely soft, and it's definitely buyer's market, not seller's market there. Then there is another news out of Russia. Basically, there is a law was passed in Russia by Russian parliaments and signed by Russian president that essentially freezes pensions, and specifically by pensions, I mean there is sort of like a kind of like a fixed amount pension that's given by the state to everyone. So I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking is that um, um, Russia did a sort of pension reform where people would are required, they forced to basically put, contribute a portion of their salary into various pension schemes that then invest into the stock or debt market. So essentially, basically, it's investing. It's kind of a forced investing. You are forced to invest in with the idea that you have supplemental sort of pension that's driven by returns from investing. And that whole thing got frozen in Russia till 2025. And, then, given that where the whole Russian stock market and debt market is, it's once it gets reopened, if it gets reopened in 2025, it's probably there'll be nothing to sort of to get there. Let's put it this way. Then actually, let's switch to Australia, which almost never talk, and that really helps a lot Ukraine with various military supplies, and Ukraine's super grateful to Australia. However, I do want to be very critical of Australia, which is Australian Prime Minister decided to put the limits on the prices of coal, and Australia is one of the largest coal producers in the world. It actually, I think, was used to be largest exporter of coal to China. Then I think there was some kind of dispute. There was trade war. There's deterioration of relationship. So I believe China still imports a lot of Australian crude, coal, but not as much. But anyways, the point is that the prime minister decided to put limit on the prices of coal, which means that he's literally economically illiterate and should not be in that position, which it will lead to shortages of the coal, which actually can lead to actual blackouts, because the coal is being used in Australia to generate electricity. So that's that sort of situation there, which is, I would say, also is misguided policy in terms of fighting conventional energy producers, which leads to reduction in supply, and then prices goes through the roof, and then all of this politician, they add extra sort of insult to injury. They basically create even more incentive for those producers to reduce production even further, because they cannot sell at the market prices. So and that leads to a disaster situation eventually in the economy, in the country, and it will sort of affect everyone as a result. Then a little bit about China and Taiwan, more about Taiwan. As I mentioned before, there is like literally non-stop flow of various sort of delegations from various countries from the West to Taiwan. So today was a Polish parliament delegation. Then there were governors of U.S. states, Idaho, Indiana, and Arizona. So uh, I think what this really means is probably the way I would interpret this is that all of these delegations, they basically kind of like providing sort of political defense for Taiwan in a hope that China will not sort of start invasion, because there is this high ranking, high level internet, politicians from the West, which could create a problem. I think that's probably the only way to explain this. I think if China decides to start it, they will not care about all of these politicians. They will do what they want to do, to be to be honest. But I think this is just hope, and as we all know, hope is not a strategy, never works. So let's actually now switch to Ukraine. So Ukraine was attacked by Russian sort of missiles, rockets. It was targeted, and the attack was in a way sort of broad based. It was definitely targeting energy distribution assets, sort of transformers and substations and all that stuff. But it also was, hitting some of the industrial assets that Russia believes are probably sort of dangerous for the Russian side. So attack was not as effective as they used to be. So didn't sort of, it was not sort of final blow for the Ukrainian power grid. Yes, there are blackouts. There are sort of uncontrollable blackouts. However, it did not sort of disintegrate into the islands, as I mentioned before. One of the regions that got hit very hard was Odessa. I believe also Moldova lost electricity for some time. So it was then another one was Zhytomyr, so Vinnytsia, so typical areas. The west of Ukraine was actually pretty spared this time around. There wasn't many attacks there. There were some attacks in Kiev, but they were less successful this time around. So, possibly it's possible to attribute this whole relatively like low success of the Russian attacks to increase in and sort of improvement in Ukrainian anti-air defenses, which is Ukraine over past, let's say, months received some anti-air rockets from various countries, including like Spain, I think, well, not a single, from the US, from Germany. So it's definitely not enough, but it's enough to reduce amount of critical damage. At the same time, the needed amount of critical damage that will disintegrate the system is also very thin. Or in other words, this cushion that's left is very thin and almost non-existent. So as we can see, Russia will continue these attacks, and it's determined to basically disintegrate Ukrainian power grid at this point. Now let's switch to the front line. Let's do walks through the front line, starting in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north. So the situation along the state border is fairly stable. There is some exchange of the fire, of the fire, but it's not as intense. There are some Ukrainian attacks in Kursk, but like relative to where it used to be, let's say in October, September, it's still the level of activity is fairly low. Now let's move to North Lugansk front line. Things here are pretty quiet from Ukrainian side. So as you can see, Ukrainian side is firmly on defensive. It's not trying to achieve much at this point. Russian side is trying some local local attacks, which also don't get anywhere. So we would say that at this point there is a balance of power on this section of the front line, and opportunity for Ukrainian sides are completely gone, and unclear when they will open up. For the Russian side, they still not strong enough to launch anything major here, but they sort of like probing Ukrainian defenses at this point. or basically kind of like a harassing to kind of keep Ukrainian side stressed. But otherwise, this is at this point area where there's not much is going to be happening for some time, probably till January. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line, where the whole action is. Let's put this way. So it was super active today. There are Russian attacks here up in Belorivka, but most important, Wagner mercenaries continuing their attacks everywhere, as you can see. Soledar, Bahmut, our area up north of Soledar, typical Yakovlivka, pretty much everywhere they were attacking. Sort of no success, but that's sort of kind of like expected, normal. Also, there was no confirmation that Russian troops captured, that Wagner mercenaries captured Pidhorodne. I reported it on the 3rd. So it's still in Ukrainian hands so far. Then if we look a little bit south of Bahmut, things sort of also active. Russian side is reporting that they made some progress in Opetne, but this really means like typically, okay, they captured one stronghold and moved forward by 50 meters. It's essentially it's not even World War One. It's just very slow, basically crawl, and there's not much of credibility in this information because you can never verify is that some small stronghold was captured, and no, you can always claim you captured something just to create impression of progress. Nevertheless, but there is real progress for the Russian side here. As I mentioned, they essentially cleaned up this whole eastern side of this channel here that provides water to Donbass from Dnipro. And obviously the next sort of direction is to capture this whole area, clean up, capture Klishchiivka as the next largest objective, and then, move up north and effectively capture Bahmut. So there were some interviews from Ukrainian soldiers here defending, and they feel is that this is totally speculative, just sharing information, could be totally wrong. But their feel is that Russian troops are trying to capture Bahmut by outflanking and essentially squeezing Ukrainian troops by New Year. The way it goes right now, it's definitely not going to happen by New Year, let's put it this way. Unless there will be more troops, then more resources on the Russian side. At the same time, Ukrainian command is throwing more sort of resources in this furnace. So, I mean, maybe we can compare this to some kind of like Verdun in during World War One in France. So basically, it's just a mid grinder. There were many of those, plenty on the Western Front in World War One. So it's just similar mid grinder here. And as I mentioned before, that's the whole point. That's what the head of Wagner mercenaries, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is sort of trying to achieve, right? He's clearly saying we want to kill as many Ukrainian soldiers as possible. It's not the goal to capture territory, because once we kill enough, once we kill this backbone that's sort of holding on everything, then the floodgates will open up, and then we'll just easily move forward because there's no backbone that can sort of stop us, essentially. That's a whole strategy. He's basically exchanging what he believes is low quality human capital, which is prisoners, for sort of like higher, better quality human capital. So that's very primitive strategy there. Now let's move down south. Let's see what's going on the central Donbass front line. Things here actually somewhat more quieter. So there were no any large-scale attacks out of Pisky salient. That's pretty new, and they were pretty quiet here up north of Avdiivka. At the same time, Russian troops tried to achieve progress in Marinka and near Novomikhailivka without any success so far. Now let's quickly check The Zaporizhya front lines is here are sleepy as they always are for now, and going actually back to this whole situation here, it looks like it's going to remain sleepy for let's say foreseeable future until there's a change in the balance of power. Basically, what happened is that Russian side managed to repair this Crimean bridge, the road part of it. So at this point, Russia can easily supply Crimea, with through this bridge, so it works. So any opportunity to create large encirclement by moving down south and cutting Russian troops up here north and then in Crimea, it's completely gone vanished for Ukrainian side, and at the same time, Ukrainian command is probably extremely preoccupied with situation around Bahmut, which is bad and deteriorating. We'll see if it's deteriorating at sort of fast enough speed, and so there's not enough sort of resources to do attack, let's say, towards Berdansk or Mariupol at this point. And basically, also Russian side is getting saturated with those mobilized conscripts. So again, even from that perspective, opportunity is vanishing. So essentially, at this point, the initiative, let's say, is going away from Ukrainian side and slowly moving to the Russian side. It's not clearly in Russian hands yet, and it's still probably going to take all of December for that to happen. But that's a trend. That's where it's slowly moving. Whether Ukrainian side will manage to sort of regain it remains to be seen. Really dependent on two things: either more Western advanced military equipment, or improvement in organization, which is, I mentioned many times before. Right now, Ukrainian army is just a Soviet army, and the Soviet army will never be able to win over Wagner mercenaries. Just mission impossible. And generally with against Russian army that has also enough soldiers on the ground boots. So it's a strategic dead end for now for Ukrainian command, for Ukrainian sort of leadership, and as a whole for Ukraine. Whether Ukrainian command or society will be able to sort of resolve this strategic dead end really depends. It's hard to predict because it requires really deep, extremely, well, I wouldn't say they are really painful, but I guess from a perspective of people in the top, extremely painful changes, which essentially may lead to change of those people, and that's something that they don't want, and probably they would rather lose the war than lose control. And so remains to be seen. So it's going to be like fight between those sort of two opposite forces. Which one will prevail? We'll see as things develop. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow, bye bye.